So I'm curious, how many people here enjoy games, like board games? Show of hand. Quite a few. We should have a board game night. In our family, we like games. Most of us like games. There's one or two who are not so much into it all the time, but we like board games. We like video games. We like. Have you ever played Jackbox? Yeah. Okay, it's more like a phone game or Gartic phone. Lots of fun games. I'm on the church softball team with the win this past week. Way to go, guys. Yeah. There's one game I don't really like, but I do play it. The comparison game. You can't buy this in a store. It just sort of happens. I remember a number of years ago, I was we had a church conference where someone had gone to like a bigger church conference and brought back the videos, and we're watching a leadership guy speak to us, and he was a great speaker. Had a great message. The problem was, like, at this point I'm like mid-30s, and this guy's talking about his mega church, and he's like 29 years old, and right away, like, I just start comparing. Like it's not my goal to be a megachurch pastor and like that, but there's a part of me that's like, how do I stack up against this guy? Like, how did he know? How did he know from early on? Because he talks about his whole story and he goes through, and who it is, it doesn't really matter, but he had this vision early on, and he sort of said, I'm going to go and I'm going to plant this church, and this is how it's going to grow, and there was like 10,000 people, and this guy's like 29 years old, and I'm like, I would never be able to do that now, much less, when I was that age. And it's hard to not compare yourself. I know a lot of you may have this issue with social media. You see what other people are doing on social media, and you compare, how am I stacking up against this person? Maybe you see someone you used to go to high school with, and they're just doing great, or they're on a beach in Cancun or something like that, and you're sitting, in the snow. And you just start comparing yourselves. But the problem, I heard someone say this, like the danger of social media is that you're comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel, right? Like, you see, no one posts the picture of themselves, elbow deep in baby diapers, right? Like, that doesn't make Instagram, usually. But, someone else is putting their awesome thing out there, and you're looking at yourself, and it's just hard to compare, right? It's not apples to apples. I've heard this quote before: comparison is the thief of joy. Attributed to Teddy Roosevelt, or C.S. Lewis, or Mark Twain, or a whole bunch of other people. It's really hard to track down who originally came up with this idea. We don't really know, but there's a truth to it. Comparison is the thief of joy. Like, you might be completely happy with your situation until you see what someone else has, and then you realize, I want what they have. Maybe envy is the thief of joy is a better way to say it, but when it comes to comparison, we almost always compare in unhealthy ways. It's one of two ways. Either I'm way better than that guy, right? Like, you look down and say, at least I'm not doing what that guy does. The other temptation is to say, I'm doing so much worse than her or him or whoever else, right? Like, you almost never compare to somebody who's on the same level as you. And I was thinking about those who are suffering for their faith. Some people in the world are facing persecution to the point of death. And when I compare myself to them, I'm like, I have it really easy. Like, I might have someone disagree with me on Facebook if I were to post something. That's about the level of persecution I have to worry about. Now, some of us might experience persecution in different ways. I think, in all likelihood, persecution is probably not on the map for a lot of people. Like, most people are just really struggling to get by with life. Like, there's just the idea of persecution is not even on your radar. It's just like you are just in a situation where, like, you're just barely getting by. You're living paycheck to paycheck, barely making ends meet. And then there's other people absolutely killing it. Like, you look around and you think, man, that guy is doing awesome, or that girl's doing awesome. Everything's going great. It seems like they're set up for life. Maybe you feel that way right now. You feel like everything is going amazing for you. For the first group, your temptation is to give up. Despair. Just give up. What difference does faith make? For the second group, your temptation is to get complacent. I'm doing awesome. What do I need faith for? Or you get it twisted and you think that your success comes because of your faith. Like, God is making me rich because of my faith. There are a lot of people who feel that way. Here's the thing, though. Nothing in this world is permanent. Nothing in this world is permanent, which might seem like good news or bad news, depending on where you're standing. But what I want you to know is it's actually good news. Even if you're doing awesome right now, even if you feel like life could not be better, the fact that nothing in this world is permanent is actually good news. Because today's big idea is that faith trusts that whatever comes now, God has prepared something better. So if you're in the first group and you're feeling like, I can barely make ends meet, like I'm just struggling, everything seems to be going wrong, have faith that God has something better for you. And if you're in the second group, you're like, life could not be better, the great news is that God has something better for you. So don't despair, don't get complacent. Today we're going to continue our series called Greater Than. It's about the book of Hebrews. And the Hebrews shows us that Jesus is greater. Greater than the angels, greater than Moses, greater than priests. Last week we talked about him being a greater sacrifice, and because of him, this week we have a greater hope. A greater hope. So last few weeks I've mentioned that we don't know who the author is, but we know who it was written to. It was written to those who were being persecuted and considering going back to Judaism. So again, the idea of persecution may not be on your radar right now, but the principle still stands. For those people who were hearing the author originally, they were under persecution and they were struggling with this despair of what's next. And the author wants them to know Jesus has something better for you. And so whether persecution's on your radar or not, it probably isn't. I want you to know that God has something better for you than even the best thing you have right now. So I'm going to start where we left off last week, Hebrews chapter 10, verse 39. Mostly we'll be in Hebrews 11 today, but we're going to start with the last verse of chapter 10. The author had been talking about those who had fallen away, those who were maybe on the brink of salvation, but said it's too much, it's too hard, I'm going to go the opposite direction. He writes, but we are not like those. We are not like those who turn away from God to their own destruction. We are the faithful ones whose souls will be saved. Like, understand, the people he's writing to, saying, don't be like those people who come up to the edge of salvation and then say, no, it's too much, I'm stepping back. He's writing to people who say, and he's saying, you're not them. You're the ones who have put your faith in Jesus. You're the ones who are faithful, whose souls will be saved. And then it's like, as we turn the page of the next chapter, he turns the page and says, let's talk about faith. And this is a passage that's sometimes referred to as the Hall of Faith, this entire chapter, because this is like a who's who of all the heroes of the Old Testament, talking about what it means to have faith. And I'd never been to like the Hockey Hall of Fame or the Baseball Hall of Fame or Football Hall of Fame. I've heard people talk about it before and say, who gets in there? It's kind of like, how can you tell the story of this sport without mentioning this person? If you can't tell the story without mentioning them, then they definitely get into the Hall of Fame. And I think the same thing is kind of true with the Hall of Faith. Not all-encompassing. There's others who may be worthy, but this is who came to the author's mind at the time. So Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. And so it's not blind faith. Faith is not something that we come to and to say, well, I'm just hoping for the best. No, it's the reality of what we hope for. It is evidence of things we cannot see. And probably the easiest way to talk about this, the analogy, is like the wind. You can't see the wind, but you know it's there. You can see the evidence of the wind by the fact that the leaves are blowing across the yard, usually from your neighbor's yard onto your yard, as it usually goes. But there's definitely something there. And it's not like you have blind faith that it exists. No, you can see evidence. And so when we look at the earth that we live in, it is evident that there was a creator. It is evident that there was some kind of intelligent design behind it. And so we're talking about the reality of what we hope for. It's the evidence of things we cannot see. We know that there's something, or I would say someone out there. Through their faith, the people in the days of old earned a good reputation. Another translation says that this is what they were commended for. So when we're looking at the reason that the author wrote Hebrews, right? Writing to people who were persecuted, writing to people who are considering giving up their faith to go back to Judaism because it was easier, it was safer, it was accepted under the Roman government. What the author's saying is what you need is some encouragement. You need some role models. So I'm going to tell you about some of the reasons that you should have faith, the reality of what we hope for. By faith, we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command, that what we see now did not come from anything that can be seen. So again, the idea that there's an intelligent design, not blind faith. It was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to God than Cain did. Abel's offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man, and God showed his approval of his gifts. Although Abel is long dead, he still speaks to us by his example of faith. The author's saying, you need some encouragement, you need a role model. Let's go right back to almost the very beginning. Let's go back to the beginning and talk about the fact that we have faith that the world exists through God. But let's talk about the first children of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. Abel is a role model for faith. He came and he brought an offering, and it was more acceptable. It wasn't that the animal was more acceptable than the fruit and vegetable that Cain brought. It was the heart behind it. As much as I would love to say, God loves us to cook animals more than fruit, but that's not the case. He's just saying it's the heart behind it that matters. And so Abel came with a heart of worship, like we sang about this morning, and saying, this is what I want to give to you. Cain, whatever his mentality was, probably out of obligation or maybe comparison to Abel, I got to do something. One was accepted, the other one wasn't. It was by faith that Enoch was taken up to heaven without dying. If you're unfamiliar with some of these stories, all you have to do is just read the whole Old Testament, and you'll become familiar with them. But these are the stories that happened throughout the Old Testament. Enoch was a man, and it says that he lived, I think it was 365 years, and then God took him. Like, he didn't face death. Text says he disappeared because God took him. For before he was taken up, he was known as a person who pleased God. It is impossible to please God without faith. So if you want to please God, you have to have faith. Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that God exists and that he rewards those who sincerely seek him. So going back to Cain and Abel, maybe Cain came with an idea that either we're just wasting our time here, there's no one up there, I don't believe in God, or maybe he didn't think that God would really reward him. Maybe there's some people, he thought God is like this cosmic being who created everything and then went off and did his own thing. But if you want to please God, you have to have faith that recognizes that there is a God, that God exists, and that he rewards those who sincerely seek him. Other passages in the Old Testament say that if you seek him, you will find him. That God wants a relationship with you. It was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God, who warned him about the things that had never happened before. Imagine the faith that would have taken. Like, imagine the ridicule that must have come. Like, what are you doing? Spending years and years and years building this thing for a flood that looks like it has no possibility of coming, and then one day it starts to rain. By his faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world. Again, probably by comparison, like the way he lived his life compared to those who didn't. And he received the righteousness that comes by faith. Understand, it wasn't building the boat that saved him. It was the righteousness of faith. The faith that he had to believe God. Now, it comes with work, obviously. Work is always coming on the other side of faith. We're called to believe and then to do. But he received the righteousness that comes by faith. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. I think it's easy to miss that. How incredible the faith must have been. Like if you felt like you got a message from God tonight and said, I want you to move up, pull up stakes, move your family, everything you have, everything you own, and start walking. And I'll tell you when to stop. How hard would that be to do? How much harder would it be to convince your spouse? And to just keep walking and keep walking and keep walking until finally one day God says, here. And if it was only that simple, but he goes on, he says, even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, for he was like a foreigner, living in tents. And so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. Like, how hard would it have been for Abraham to go all this distance, get there, and still live in a tent? Live like a foreigner in a foreign land. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. But he lived in a tent. He lived as a foreigner. Now, a foreigner or a resident alien or whatever translation you want to use, a visitor looks different and acts different. Like if all of a sudden you decided to go on a trip and you ended up in, name a country. Let's say Honduras. I don't know. You would speak a different language, most likely. You would look different. You would act different. You wouldn't know the customs and the culture. Like you would be a foreigner. And that's what Abraham was. And that's what Christians should be here on this earth. Like we need to recognize that heaven is our home. We are actually just visitors here. We are, in a sense, resident aliens living here, knowing that we have something better waiting for us when we get home. Abraham's wife, Sarah. It was by faith that even Sarah was able to have a child, though she was barren and was too old. She believed that God would keep his promise. Now, not immediately. Immediately she laughed. She said, that's crazy talk. Translation. But eventually she believed. And so a whole nation came from this one man who was as good as dead. Abraham was 99 years old when they got pregnant. A nation with so many people that like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore, there was no way to count them. And I was thinking about that, thinking, can't you count them? Like, we have an idea of how many people there are in the world today, and there's far fewer people of Israelite descent. But then I was thinking, have you ever tried to count kids at a playground? Right? If you were to try to count we have an idea of how many people live in Canada, but do we have an exact number? Because by the time you go, especially in those days, there's no such thing as internet or email. If you were to start counting people, by the time you get to the end, your count from the beginning is off. Someone's been born or someone's died. It is uncountable. From one man who was as good as dead, God does this amazing thing. And it all happens by faith. All these people died still believing what God had promised them. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, living in tents, waiting for the city to be built with foundations, and they never get it. They died in faith. But even more than the city, even more than the foundation, the real promise they were looking forward to was the Messiah. And they died looking forward to that, saying that one of these offspring that we had, that comes from one man to his son, to his grandson, to suddenly a whole bunch of great-great-grandchildren. And then beyond that, we know that some point down the line, someone is going to be the Savior of the world. And that's what they were looking forward to. They did not receive what they promised, but they saw it all from a distance and they welcomed it. They agreed that there were foreigners and nomads here on earth. Obviously, people who can say such things are looking forward to a country they can call their own. Like they lived as foreigners and nomads, knowing that God had something better for them down the road. If they had longed for the country they came from, they could have gone back. Remember, what's the author writing for? Writing to Christians who are Jewish by birth and thinking about retreating back into Judaism for safety. And he's giving them role models, saying, Abraham could have done that. He could have gone back to the land that he knew. They all could have gone back to their motherland. But they were looking for a better place. a heavenly homeland. That is why God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. The author is saying, don't go back. Go forward. God has something better for you. It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Now, we know from the story, and if this is your first time in church, you're thinking, what? He offered his son as a sacrifice? He doesn't actually kill him, but in Abraham's mind, it was already done. Like, imagine living your entire life hoping and praying for a son, and God says it'll happen, and finally it happens, and then years later, God says, now I want you to give him to me. I want you to give your child to me. And Abraham was willing to do it. Not because he didn't love the son, but because he trusted God. Abraham, who had received God's promises, was ready to sacrifice his only son Isaac, even though God had told him, Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. And I think that's why he was willing to do it. Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. In a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead, because in his mind it was already done. But Abraham was saying, God's the one who gave the son to me. If God decides to take him, he will give him back. That's the kind of faith that Abraham had. It was by faith that Isaac promised blessings for the future to his sons, Jacob and Esau. Again, we're talking very small numbers here, and a blessing to come. It was by faith that Jacob, when he was old and dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and bowed in worship as he leaned on his staff. Now, the reason that he needed a staff is because he had a bad hip. And the reason he had a bad hip is because he wrestled with God. And God changed his identity in that moment. He said, you used to be a deceiver, but now I'm making you someone new. I'm making you Israel. It was by faith that Joseph, when he was about to die, said confidently to the people of Israel that the people of Israel would leave Egypt. He even commanded them to take his bones with him when they left. Think about Joseph's story. Hard to imagine he has much love for the place he grew up. I mean, he was basically tortured by his brothers, thrown into a pit to die, eventually sold into slavery. Everything good in his life eventually happened in Egypt. But he was hanging on to this promise that something better is in store for us and for our people. And so he said, I know God is going to call us back to the promised land. I'm believing that promise. And when you go, I want you to take my bones with me, or with you. And so for probably 400 years, Joseph's sarcophagus, whatever it looked like, was there waiting, ready to be taken back. And any kid who came by it would probably say, what's that all about? And the parents could say, that's Joseph's. Those are the bones of Joseph. At some point, God's going to call us back to the promised land. Even when they're at the worst point of slavery, they could look at that and say, we have a promise from God. And we have someone who had enough faith to say, we're going to go at some point. It was by faith that Moses' parents hid him for 3 months when he was born. They saw that God had given them an unusual child, and they were not afraid to disobey the king's command. It was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Again, these are all stories from the Old Testament. Read through Exodus. It's fascinating stuff. He chose to share in the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. So again, why is the author writing to the people? People who are thinking about turning their back on the faith in Jesus, turning their back on the promise that's to come. The author's saying, don't do it for a momentary experience of pleasure. Stick with it. Just like Moses did. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to his great reward. Don't trade eternal life for a moment of pleasure. It was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He kept right on going because he kept his eyes on the one who is invisible. I like that use of wording there. Kept his eyes on the one who is invisible. But he knew that there was something better, and so he kept after it. It was by faith that Moses commanded the people of Israel to keep the Passover and to sprinkle blood on the doorposts so that the angel of death would not kill their firstborn son. All these things, all these stories are happening by faith. It was by faith that the people of Israel went right through the Red Sea as though they were on dry ground. But when the Egyptians tried to follow, they were all drowned. One group had faith in God, the other didn't. It was by faith that the people of Israel marched around Jericho for 7 days, and the walls came crashing down. By any standards, not a great battle plan. Just walk around. But because God told them to do it, it was an amazing battle plan, and God won the battle. It was by faith that Rahab, the prostitute, was not destroyed by the people in her city who refused to obey God, for she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. Somehow she knew to throw her lot in with God's people. And there was this promise that she became a part of. In fact, she becomes part of the lineage of Jesus. She's the great someone or the grandmother of Jesus because she had faith. And it's probably about this time that the author realizes that he's running out of paper because he just throws a whole bunch all in together. How much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of the faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all the prophets. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of fire, and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. Women received their loved ones back from the dead again, from death. What's interesting about these examples is that they're all imperfect. I mean, David's one of my favorite characters in the entire Bible, but man, his resume was lacking in some areas. I remember when I was a kid, Samson, I loved the story of Samson, because who wouldn't love the story of Samson, right? It's a super strong man. Until you read more of his story and realize he was actually really weak. Physically strong, but he had a lot of weakness in him. But you don't have to be perfect to have faith. And that's what these stories tell us. God can use your weakness and turn it into strength. He said the same thing to Paul. By your weakness is my strength shown. But all these heroes, right? These are the people you put on the poster. King David, the prophet Samuel, Samson. They're all like the heroic, victorious ones. What about the other side? Others were tortured, refusing to turn from God in order to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. Like they didn't have the awesome story that David had. They didn't have the awesome story that Samson had. Some were jeered at. Their backs were cut open with whips. Others were chained in prison. Some died by stoning. Some were sawed in half. Tradition says that Isaiah was sawed in half. Others were killed with the sword. So we've got some who were victorious by the sword and avoided the sword. Others were killed by the sword. Some went about wearing skins of sheep and goats, destitute and oppressed and mistreated. They were too good for this world, wandering over deserts and mountains, hiding in caves and holes in the ground. So it doesn't matter if you're doing awesome, if you're absolutely killing it, if you are the poster child for what it looks like to follow God, or if you are just like suffering and being whipped and beaten and abused. They're all people who have faith. All of these people earned a good reputation because of their faith. Yet none of them received all that God had promised. Again, they were looking forward to something better. They were looking forward to a Messiah that we have seen. For God had something better in mind for us, so they would not reach perfection without us. So again, the author writing to people who are considering going back on their faith, going back to Judaism, the author says, I want to give you the history of Judaism. And all these people, they all had faith, and they were all looking forward to the Messiah. And now you've seen the Messiah. Don't turn your back on the Messiah. Like, you want to go back to the Old Testament? Fine, but they're all pointing towards Jesus. So don't turn your back on Jesus now, just because things are hard. So the wrong application for this, you've got some people who are doing awesome in their faith. You got some people who are suffering in their faith. The wrong application is nihilism. All right? The idea that life is pointless. If we're really just waiting for the afterlife, who cares what happens now? That's not the message we get from the author of Hebrews. I could see why some people might think that, but it's not the message the author of Hebrews gives us. What we see in all these examples is forward motion. They're looking forward. They're moving forward. They're having faith, and being seen in what they do, whether they were successful by earthly standards or not. Even though they all died without receiving what God had promised, they are all examples of how to live lives of faith. That's what we're being called to do. It's even more true for us. Because, again, we have something that they don't have. We have a risen Messiah who has given us a purpose. So we need to let the promise of the future shape your present. Let the promise of the future shape your present. Don't shrink back when life gets hard. Don't get complacent when things get comfortable. If you're killing it, keep on going with faith. If you're struggling, keep on going with faith. No matter what, God has something better for you. Keep walking by faith, because that faith tells us that something better is coming, something greater than this world can offer or take away.